What's the scariest gut feeling you had that came true? Story 1. I worked at a hospital PRN and frequently picked up extra shifts. I worked overnights and had asked the supervisor to go ahead and put me down to work the next night. Well, as the night went on, I just felt absolutely awful, like something terrible was about to happen. I had never wanted so badly to be home. I lived an hour away from my job. So by the morning, I called the supervisor and asked her to remove me from the schedule. I went home, feeling an unexplainable sense of dread. By the time I woke up, I was getting calls that an EF5 tornado had hit the town I worked in and the hospital I worked at. Story 2. By the time I was 13, my mom had been battling cancer for a year and a half. It was a few days after my birthday, and she was due for an IV port surgery the following morning. Just a simple day surgery, right? She came to my room to say goodnight, and I freaked out. For some reason, I knew this surgery would not go well. This is after she had lung surgery and multiple rounds of chemo and radiation on her chest and brain. She reassured me that it was fine and that we would go bowling a few days later. She never returned home. During the surgery, her remaining full lung collapsed, and it went entirely downhill from there. Just over a month later, she passed away. I have no idea what caused my fear of that being the end, but unfortunately, I was right. Story 3. I was working overnight security at an old hotel-turned-dormitory that also rented out rooms to the public. Just a chaotic place with many questionable individuals living there. I always prided myself on going down every dark hallway, leaving no stone unturned. This one night, though, I got to the double doors that led to a particularly dark hallway, going to the back entrance of the kitchen, and froze. "No," I said to myself, "I'm not going down there tonight." This was extremely out of character for me, and I had no idea what would cause me to suddenly feel so strongly about avoiding that hallway, but the feeling was overwhelming. I went with my gut. I was kind of embarrassed and didn't tell anyone. That night, at that exact time, a person struggling with addiction was robbing the kitchen. There were extremely sharp, oversized cheese knives hanging all over the place, just in case he didn't have his own weapon. I'm pretty sure he would have attacked me as the only witness had I gone down there. Who knows what the outcome would have been? But I like to think something protected me that night. And if it was my subconscious, how did it sense there was danger before I even opened the doors? Story 4. My mom is a nurse who works the night shift. As a child, I was always anxious, constantly worrying. I often feared that my mom would get into a wreck on her way home from work. Fast forward to 2006. I had just walked into one of my classes and my teacher started taking attendance. When he got to my name, he said, "Vaughn, you're marked absent. Says you're supposed to be with your aunt." My aunt taught biology at my high school. I thought that was strange. I didn't know of any reason I'd be excused from class. I walked to my aunt's classroom, and her student teacher told me, "She had an important call. She's in the office." I knew instantly that it had to do with my mom. I knew she had been in a car accident. Just as I had that thought, my name and my brother's were called over the PA system, asking us to report to the office. I started crying in the doorway, and the student teacher probably thought I was having a breakdown. I got to the office and found out I was right. My mom had been cut off by a reckless driver around 7 a.m. on her way home. She spun off the road into the forest and went down an embankment. She broke or crushed everything on her left side, and the woman who ran her off the road just kept driving. My mom had been unconscious in her car for about 3 hours before a passing motorist saw a headlight reflecting in his rearview mirror. He checked again, saw nothing behind him, but decided to investigate, and found my mom about 75 yards into the woods. She was in dense cover, and her car was black, completely invisible from the road. The only reason she was found was because her damaged headlight flickered and caught that driver's eye. She eventually made a full recovery. Story 5. This might sound silly, but one evening after soccer practice, I was riding up the escalator and started thinking, what if I get up there and see a woman being harassed by some guy? What would I do? Would I help? You know, typical teenage thoughts about whether you'd step in or freeze. Then I thought, what if it really happens and nobody believes I thought about it first? And then, what if I even thought about thinking about it? All that nonsense. I was about 13 or 14 years old. It was late, really dark outside, and almost nobody was around. As I reached the top of the escalator and exited the subway, I saw a woman walk past. Right then, a drunken man started yelling at her, catcalling and using offensive language. He sounded aggressive, like he might actually hurt her. He started jogging toward her. Without thinking, I just yelled out, "Hey!" As soon as I said it, I remember thinking, "What have you done? Now you're in danger." Then without control, my mouth shouted again, "Leave her alone." I was trembling, terrified. I was just a kid. I was holding my soccer ball under one arm and my workout bag in the other. Not exactly ready to run or fight, and even if I was a skinny kid. He turned toward me and started shouting threats, saying he'd kick my head in like I'd kicked the ball. I thought, I need to run, but my legs didn't move. It felt wrong to run while she was still nearby. Knowing I couldn't fight or escape, I just kept circling around him, scared out of my mind, until she had gotten far enough away. Then as he nearly caught up to me, I jogged off in the same direction she had gone. I remember walking afterwards, still shaking, shocked at what I had done, because none of it was intentional. The words and actions came out of me like a reflex. Eventually, when we had gotten far enough away, the woman turned and thanked me. I felt like a hero then. I told my parents. They didn't believe me. I told my best friend. He didn't believe me either. So I stopped telling anyone. Story 6. I've lived in South Louisiana my entire life, about an hour south of New Orleans. In July 2005, I was only 11 years old. I kept having this recurring nightmare of me lying in my backyard, staring at the sky, and suddenly a large brown wave of water, probably 30 feet high, came up and washed my entire neighborhood away. It would always end right after the wave crashed, and I would wake up. Then Hurricane Katrina hit a month later. My hometown was out of power for 2 weeks, but thankfully, there was no flooding. But then I had the same dream again after Katrina hit, except this time I saw the aftermath. I kept seeing dead animals floating past me as I tried to swim to my house. When I woke up, I had this horrible feeling that something terrible was going to happen to us. Hurricane Rita was making landfall, and we were waiting it out at my house. I kept telling my mom that I wanted to go to my aunt's house, which was in the parish north of us. She said no and told me to go back to sleep. About an hour later, the levees in my town broke, and our entire town had 1 hour to evacuate. Most of our parish was under 6 feet of water. I lost 2 classmates and 6 family members. When we came back about a week later, everything was coated in mud. There were dozens of dead animals all over the road. Most of us were homeless for years after, but at least we're alive. So now when I tell my mom something, she listens. Story 7. My brother had Rolandic epilepsy, and while all the doctors said it would be fine and he would grow out of it, I found myself lying awake every night, unable to sleep, just focusing on the sound of his breathing and listening for a seizure. Then one night he had a seizure, and somehow I didn't hear him. He passed away in his sleep, and it haunts me to know that I was likely lying awake in bed, and in the other room, it was happening. His condition always scared me, yet somehow I always thought it would be my dad who would pass away. He's a probation officer, and I feared he would be hurt on the job. I would lie awake at night crying over imagined scenarios of his death. I may not have predicted the exact course of events, but pretty much all of my childhood fears came true. Ever since then, I've been unable to dismiss feelings of dread because what if something else comes true? Story 8. One of the worst memories I have is waking up from a nap in the summer when I was about 7 years old. I woke up and heard screaming and fighting. I thought my parents were watching TV, so I went to the living room, and they were gone. My stomach dropped. I just knew he was hurting her badly. I ran to the back of the house and found my mom cowered in the corner, with blood everywhere. My dad was drunk and attacking her. That strange burst of adrenaline that sometimes happens to kids kicked in, and I jumped into the middle of it by leaping onto the bed. My dad was a construction worker and very strong, and I started trying to hit him to get him away from my mom. I pushed him against the wall and helped my mom up, and she ran right past me, leaving me alone in the room with him. He started coming after me too. I'm lucky he was drunk and I was fast. Faster than I'd ever been. Story 9. About a month before my brother passed away, I had a terrible dream about him. We were extremely close. In the dream, he died. I told him about it and he brushed it off, telling me he'd always be around. The night before he passed, we were in his office discussing business, and his last words to me were, "Change does not come through comfort. I love you." The next morning I woke up and something felt off. I got ready for school, and as I was walking down the hall, I noticed his door was cracked open. Usually it was closed because he was working. If it was open and he wasn't busy, I would usually pop in, say good morning, and continue my day. This morning I saw the door cracked and went to open it, and I saw my brother's feet. The first thought that crossed my mind was, what if he's dead? I pulled my hand away from the door and shook the thought. It felt too random, and I walked away. I had never had that kind of thought before in my life and had no reason to think it now. I went to school, and about an hour later, I got a text from my best friend asking what was going on at my house. She said she had passed by and saw an ambulance and police outside. I told her I didn't know, but the first thought that popped into my head was about my brother. 10 minutes later, I got a text from my little sister telling me I needed to come home, but she didn't say why. I knew right then that my brother had passed away. When I got home, they confirmed it. Storytime. This didn't happen to me, but to my dad. My family and some of my parents' friends were supposed to go abroad to attend a wedding. The day before we were supposed to leave, my dad woke up from a nightmare in full panic. I remember thinking it was frightening to see a grown-up that afraid of a dream, but because of it, we didn't go. I was furious. I had been looking forward to the trip for ages and told all my friends about it. But Dad refused to go. It was September 28, 1994. The country we were supposed to visit was Estonia, and the ferry we were scheduled to be on sank that night. 852 people died. My dad later described the feeling as an alarm inside my body, shouting that this is wrong, this won't end well, don't do it. He said the feeling was so powerful it couldn't be ignored. He compared it to the difference between a normal travel worry and what he felt. A normal worry is like a car alarm going off down the street. You notice it, but ignore it. This felt like an explosion. Story 11. I never liked my father. I always said I would never treat my kids the way he treated me. I often said, I will never be like my father. I also said similar things about my stepfather. That man just couldn't stand me. I was so different from the rest of the family. There was a phrase I used to say when things got tense. What am I? The milkman's son? I said it as a joke, but I must have said it thousands of times over the years. Well, it turns out I wasn't far off. I'm not the milkman's son. I'm the son of a corporate lawyer in New York City. My mother, my stepfather, and the man I believed was my father all knew who my real father was. They kept both of us in the dark for decades. I've only known the truth for a few years now. I'm still adjusting. But deep down, I always knew something was off. I never felt like I belonged. I just didn't fit in. I no longer speak with the people I once called family. However, my real father and I have bonded a lot, and we're doing our best to make up for the decades we lost. Story 12. I once had a vivid mental image of a car running a red light from the perpendicular direction. I was stopped at a red light at the time, but I pictured this other car blowing through once my light turned green. When it was my turn to go, I hesitated because the vision felt so real. Sure enough, a car came flying through the intersection from the opposite direction. If I had gone, we absolutely would have crashed. Another time I saw a girl, an acquaintance of my high school-age sister, driving around town. She didn't do anything wrong, but I had a strong gut feeling about her driving and told my mom never to let my sister ride with her. Less than a week later, my parents happened to witness a fatal car accident. They got out to help the victims, and as other drivers were slowing down to go around the scene, one car didn't slow down at all. It sped straight through the accident area and hit my dad. It was the girl I had warned my mom about. Luckily, my dad wasn't fatally injured, but his arm was seriously damaged. He now has permanent pins in it because of that crash. Story 13. True story. I was a freshman in high school when 9/11 happened and was kind of a worrier. I'd always watch the news, read newspapers, and had a solid understanding of who bin Laden was and what his goal was. I remember on September 10th, around 11 a.m., I got a really bad, intense feeling in my mind and went to the nurse's office. I called my mom and told her I wasn't feeling well and needed to be sent home from school. She was busy working and couldn't come get me, but said she would ask my grandfather if he could. He agreed and showed up within about 30 minutes. When I got into his car, he looked at me and said I looked fine. We talked for a good portion of the ride home, And at some point, I remember saying to him that I thought tomorrow was going to be the day the world ended. I truly believed we were going to be attacked on a massive scale. I'm talking nuclear and everything. Obviously, it wasn't that extreme, but still, the next day was September 11th. I'll never forget the feeling in my stomach during third period when my principal pulled my teacher from the classroom, and she came back in and turned on the TV to show the first tower smoking. Haunting. Story 14. I dropped my Nan off at the airport. I felt really uncomfortable about leaving her there, and she seemed overly emotional for just going on a short trip in a less than an hour plane ride. She gave me a hug and said she would be back for my daughter's first birthday. I remember the strange sinking feeling I had as she walked inside. She had a massive heart attack while standing in line waiting to board. I never saw her again. Most recently, just night before last, someone came to the door and started banging on it. I immediately got a weird feeling. The hair on my neck stood up, and my cat ran into the room and was staring at the door in a crouched, defensive posture. I know all the neighbors and a knock on the door isn't unusual, but this time it felt strange. I didn't open the door, just peeked through the peephole. I couldn't understand what the guy was saying. He knocked on the kitchen window, then on the door again, and shook the door handle. I was afraid to even speak because I'm female and alone. Well, sort of. My boyfriend had just started his usual hour-long bathroom break with his Reddit scrolling ritual. Our neighbor across the hall opened his door and asked what the man wanted as I watched through the peephole. The stranger just took off without saying anything. It's entirely possible he was just at the wrong apartment, but this isn't a big building, and there are only 2 apartments upstairs. He would have had to be completely at the wrong place. I don't know. It just gave me a really bad feeling. Story 15. I'm 23 now, but I was about 18 when this happened. I had been dating a girl for about 5 months. She told me she had been assaulted 2 years earlier. 5 months in, someone started contacting me, claiming to be the person who hurt her, via email and MSN Messenger. The messages were graphic and disturbing. He would taunt me saying he was going to do it again, and that there was nothing I could do to stop it. It really messed with my head and left me in a dark place. But I noticed something. It only happened when my girlfriend was online. I had a gut feeling she had something to do with it. I managed to get the IP address from the emails. One night at her house, I checked the IP address on her computer. They matched. It was her sending the messages. It was terrifying. This person who said she loved me had gone to great lengths to create an elaborate way to psychologically manipulate me. She now works as a psychologist with vulnerable people, including those struggling with addiction. I stayed with her for another 2 months. It was a very toxic relationship, and I couldn't get myself out because I thought I didn't deserve anything better. If you've ever been in an abusive relationship, you might understand that feeling. Eventually, I had a couple of mental breakdowns and she ended things. Story 16. I've had a few strange feelings before. I'm a twin, and every now and then, I can sense things or have dreams when something happens. The first one I remember was during dinner one night. My brother, my twin, had gone to the gym, and a few minutes after he left, I got a massive stomach cramp, bad enough that I had to curl up in a ball. It lasted about 2 minutes, then disappeared. A minute later, my brother came running through the front door, saying he had just rolled his car around the corner. He had been trapped upside down for about 2 minutes, with the seatbelt cutting into his lap. It completely freaked out me and my parents. The second time was just a couple of weeks ago. My brother and his fiancée had flown from Brisbane, Australia to Honolulu, and they were supposed to land while I was asleep. I dreamt that I was at the arrivals gate, and he walked up to me, saying the flight was fine, except for some turbulence. When I woke up, my fiancée asked, "I wonder if they've landed safely." Without thinking, I just said yes, because in my mind, he had already told me. She was more shocked than I was. Sure enough, later that afternoon, a message came through saying they had landed safely and experienced some turbulence, but were okay. Aside from that, if I ever feel randomly sad or down, I usually find out he's stressed. If I feel anxious or get butterflies in my stomach, he's probably excited about something. Story 17. Probably too late to share, but I wanted to tell my story. When I was 11, I saved up my allowance and wanted to buy a toy. My dad took my sister and me to the local toy store, and I bought an awesome lightsaber. I got in the back seat of the car, and we drove home. I should mention this was during a mild nor'easter in 1996, and the wind and rain were starting to pick up. We pulled into the driveway, and my dad and sister got out of the car and went into the house. I was so excited about my new toy that I had to open it in the car. While I was admiring my new Jedi weapon, I suddenly felt the overwhelming urge to get out of the car and go inside. Like, I have to go inside now? So I did. I walked in the door, took off my shoes, and turned around, just in time to see one of the huge maple trees in our front yard fall over in a gust of wind, right onto the back seat of the car where I had been sitting not 30 seconds earlier. We went outside to look, and there was a branch piercing the exact spot where I had been. Story 18. My husband was leaving for a job interview. I had this strong sense that something bad was going to happen, but since he had been looking for work for several months, I didn't try too hard to persuade him not to go. I just kept telling myself I was being silly. Around the time he should have been heading back, I got a phone call from him. His tire had basically peeled off on the highway. Thankfully, there was no major damage. He was able to safely pull off to the shoulder, but honestly, something like that could have caused a horrible wreck, and he could have been seriously hurt. Another time, when we were still in college and just dating, I had a dream that he was in a terrible car accident on the highway, that a semi had hit him on the driver's side and killed him. Not 2 weeks later, I was expecting him home for a visit, and hours passed from when he should have arrived. He wasn't answering his phone. He had been home for the weekend, so I ended up calling his sister. I had to practically scream at her to get her to check his room, and she realized he wasn't there. She had thought he overslept. About 5 hours after he was supposed to show up, I finally got a call from him. He had been in a serious accident on the highway where a semi hit him, but instead of the driver's side like in my dream, it hit the passenger side. The car was totaled, but aside from a mild concussion, he was perfectly fine. Story 19. For the sake of this story, we'll call this guy Steve. Steve was in my college roommate's circle of friends. We rolled in different groups, but we would have people over often. It was college. He was new, and when I met him for the first time, I had a gross feeling I couldn't quite explain. He had a fiancée, was very friendly and charming toward others, and people seemed to like him. One day I talked to my roommate about Steve and told her I just had a really uncomfortable feeling around him, but I didn't know why. She tried to convince me he was a good guy and told me I was probably just paranoid around men because I had just gotten out of a bad relationship. I tried to let it go by avoiding him, but the feeling never went away every time I saw him around school. Fast forward about 5 months later, my roommate calls me, crying hysterically. I rush home to find her soaked from a long shower, surrounded by a pile of cigarette butts, even though we had agreed smoking would never be allowed indoors. She told me Steve had come over because he needed to get something, and then tried to assault her. She fought him off, pushed him outside, locked the door, and screamed out all the windows on purpose so the neighbors could hear. He ran off. Story 20. I was having trouble with my college girlfriend and had broken up with her the night before because she refused to stop hanging out with her ex after he kissed her while she was dating me. On my walk back from work, I kept thinking about what I'd do if things got even worse. I still loved her. I imagined all the awful things I would say, how I'd tell her she never put in as much effort, never cared as much as I did. I thought about how I'd guilt her and make her feel terrible for walking away from someone who actually cared. She had broken up with that ex because he cheated when she went away to college. I just spiraled, rehearsing how I'd lash out if she ever truly hurt me. That night, she called me in tears. She said she had done something bad and needed to tell me. She told me that after we broke up, she went to his place because she was upset and confused. He comforted her, and then she slept with him. My worst fear had come true. She was already sobbing. There was no room for anger, no space for blame. I didn't lash out. I just cried and screamed in pain, asking her over and over, "Why would you do this?" Because that was all I could do. There was nothing else left. Just a deep hurt I couldn't even begin to express. Story 21. Last night, my friend and I were walking past a group of 5 guys standing on a well-lit street corner when we heard a metallic clanging noise, like something had just hit the pavement. They were standing next to a bush, and none of them made eye contact with us or spoke among themselves. The whole thing gave off a strange vibe. We walked past them and turned the corner, but I immediately had the feeling that something was really wrong. We had only gotten about 20 yards away when I turned back and saw three of them following us. One was carrying a 2-foot metal pipe, trying to hide it behind his leg. I immediately said out loud to my friend, "This guy has a pipe," and we quickly turned back toward them instead of continuing down the street where it got much darker. We cut through a parking lot to get back to a group of people nearby. The other two guys from the group crossed the street, presumably trying to cut us off if we'd gone further down the dark road. That metallic sound we heard earlier, they had tried to stash the pipe in the bush, but it hit and landed on the sidewalk. They were clearly trying to hide it from us as we passed under the streetlight. Both of us were completely sober, thankfully, because the night might have ended very differently otherwise. We were also walking a woman to her car from the bar, and my first thought was getting her away from danger. Otherwise, I probably would have called 911 and followed them from a safe distance to report it. Story 22. I had just bought my first car and went out with a bunch of my friends. I arrived late, and there were a few people who didn't usually hang around with us. Most people were drinking, and a few still decided to drive. We packed 3 cars with people and headed to one of my friends' houses. I was the third car in the line, and the 2 cars in front of me started racing once we turned into a residential neighborhood. The area is known for being very windy and having narrow roads. On top of that, I wasn't about to mess up the car I had worked so hard for at a minimum wage job. I stayed behind and drove the speed limit while the other 2 cars sped off. I knew something bad was going to happen, and my fears were confirmed when we turned a corner and one of my friends said, "Hey, that's a weird place to park a car." One of the drivers had overtaken the other and slid off into the woods. Neither person in the car was wearing a seatbelt, but somehow they walked away with just cuts and bruises. Unfortunately, the driver wasn't charged with anything, since the cop assumed he slid due to old tires and the wet road. The driver was one of the people I had never hung out with before. I haven't spoken to him since. Story 23. Not my story, but a good friend of mine. Jay and I both worked in a small-town ER. We quickly became friends. We had a very strong bond. I was working in the ER when her only son was brought in after he drowned. I remember the grief she went through, but I admired her strength when she returned to work with us. She was deeply impacted by how the nurses and doctors cared for her son and the effort they made to save him. After a few years at the ER, she was scheduled to have a few cysts removed. It was supposed to be no big deal, just an in and out outpatient procedure. The week before the surgery, I had an unexplainable urge to hug her. It was a deep, inexplicable sadness. I still remember that gut feeling of desperation. The day of the surgery came. I wanted to wish her luck, but due to a busy day in the ER, I didn't get the chance, even though the OR was right next door. I told myself I'd just see her in recovery once I got the order from the nurses. Her surgery was scheduled for 8:30 a.m. At 3 p.m., I still hadn't heard anything. I figured maybe they forgot to update her location. I picked up the phone to call recovery, but before I could dial, I got a call from the OR. They were placing an order to transfer her to the ICU and requested several more bags of blood. I felt my blood run cold. I froze. I couldn't function. Everything I was trained to do in these moments suddenly felt foreign. I went into autopilot to complete the administrative tasks. As soon as I could, I went to see her in the ICU, recalling the last conversation we had. She had asked me if I would miss her. I couldn't even process the thought at the time. Her mother later came to me and said that on the way to the hospital that morning, Jay told her she had a wonderful dream. She was playing with her son, and she felt very happy. As they wheeled her into surgery, she told her mom she was ready. My only regret is not telling her that yes, I would miss her. And I still do to this day. Story 24. Just created this account to share my story. My grandfather was diagnosed with cancer, and we lived about 2 hours away. He was sent home with hospice after being told he had only a couple of months to live. That first weekend home, my family and I made the trip and spent an amazing weekend with him, listening to his stories as he shared them with me and my children. When Sunday night came and it was time to leave, we helped him get into bed. He was already doing poorly. The next week was hard. I lived next to the phone, worried we'd get the call saying he was gone. The next weekend we made the trip again, but this time he wasn't talking anymore. He spent the entire time in bed. When Sunday came again and everyone was packing up, I just knew this was going to be the last time I saw him. I told my wife we had to stay. I couldn't leave, not now. We agreed to stay the night, and I would just call into work the next morning. I had that gut feeling. I never left his side that evening. I just sat there and talked to him. He passed away about an hour after we were originally supposed to leave. It was incredibly hard watching him take his last breath. I tear up just thinking about the whole experience. I'm so lucky we had that wonderful weekend before, and even though the last weekend was painful, I'm grateful I spent those final moments with him. I really miss my grandfather. Story 25. Father's Day this year, I was going to be busy during the day moving my soon-to-be brother-in-law into assisted living, so I called my dad very early. I got his voicemail and left a nice message. I also asked him to call me at his convenience, as I was eager to actually speak with him. After a long day of hard work, I went to dinner with the in-laws and had the worst gut-wrenching feeling that something was wrong. My dad always called people back immediately, and not hearing from him yet was disturbing. He had Parkinson's disease, a previous heart attack, and was experiencing liver failure. It wouldn't take much to put him back in the hospital. I expressed my concern multiple times and called him as soon as dinner ended. He answered and sounded exhausted, but okay. I told him how relieved I was to hear his voice. We spoke for about 20 minutes. He told me about his day, how things were going, and we made plans for me to visit the following weekend to go fishing. I told him I loved him. That evening, he mentioned to my mom that he had blood in his stool, but told her to go ahead and visit her aunt, who lived 6 hours away. The next day, my mom warned me that I might need to take him to the doctor if his symptoms continued. The next morning at 7 a.m., my mom called and told me to get to him. I made it home by 10 a.m. and found him on the couch with at least a gallon of blood in a bowl next to him. I immediately called an ambulance, and he was rushed to the hospital. I stayed with him all day and night, and with the rest of my family, made the decision to take him off life support and let him pass. He died Wednesday morning at 3:46 a.m. from an upper GI tear, combined with his body shutting down. I wish more than anything that I had acted on my gut feeling and gone to check on him. Hindsight truly is 2020. I've promised myself that I'll never ignore that kind of feeling again. Story 26. My mother battled pulmonary hypertension for several years. It caused all kinds of complications, including congestive heart failure and, shortly before she passed, kidney failure. Watching her go through it was heartbreaking. She was on a type of medication that had to be injected, so she always wore this little device that delivered the medicine continuously. Sometimes the injection sites would get horribly infected. It was terrible to witness. Many times she told me she just wished it would be over. One night in 2009, I was staying up late with a friend, playing Team Fortress 2. I had just come home from college and was living with my parents again. I got up to use the bathroom, and as I passed through the living room, I noticed my mom was still awake. I asked if she was okay, and she just kind of shrugged and asked me to rub her back. I sat down on the arm of her chair and rubbed her back for her. As I sat there, I kept thinking that if I were ever in that much pain, unable to breathe or move without suffering, I'd probably just want it all to end too. My mom said, "It's almost over." I figured she was talking about the TV show she was watching. I went back to my room and stayed up until about 5 a.m. Around 9 a.m., my grandmother, who came every morning to help out, woke me up. She told me she couldn't get my mom to respond. When I checked her, I couldn't find a pulse. She had died sitting on the couch that night. I honestly feel like she knew she was dying, but didn't know how to talk to me about it while I sat there rubbing her back. Story 27. Back in the 1970s while I was in college, I had a summer job working in the warehouse at a manufacturing company in the Chicago suburbs. They had a security guard, usually stationed at the employee entrance. He was an older German man, and honestly, he was incredibly harsh. He took his job very seriously. One time he yelled at me and a buddy over something minor, but the way he yelled, with that intense German accent, gave me the creepiest, coldest feeling. It was like I was being yelled at by a prison guard. The vibe was awful. I even joked later that he reminded me of something out of a concentration camp. I didn't think much more about it at the time. Years later, I read in the paper that he had been arrested and was being deported for lying about his past as a concentration camp guard. I just kept repeating to myself, I knew it. I knew it. His name was Konrad Schellong. He lived in Portage Park, Chicago, and was deported to West Germany in 1988. On his 1957 U.S. visa application, he wrote that he had only been a soldier, leaving out the part where he belonged to the SA, a group responsible for Kristallnacht and the brutal beatings of Jewish citizens. At his trial, a fellow Chicagoan, Bruno Bettelheim, testified about the horrors of Dachau, where he had been an inmate and Schellung had been a guard. Schellung claimed that guards were forbidden to mistreat prisoners, who were supposedly mostly criminals. When asked about the Jewish prisoners, he said, "We were told they were taken into custody for their own protection." Reading all that years later, I couldn't believe it. Yet somehow I could. Story 28. I had a dream that my middle brother had died. He and I are incredibly close, even though we're 7 years apart. I woke up from that dream, bawling and hyperventilating. It felt so real. It was about 2 weeks before his birthday, and we went shopping together. The entire time I felt like it was the last time I'd get to do something like that with him. It made me physically sick. I could barely function. On the day of his birthday, he was with our dad's side of the family, a group I don't have much respect for. That day, I felt extremely off. I kept feeling like I needed to be with my brothers and watch over them. And I was right. The day after his birthday, he was rushed to Children's Mercy Hospital with a gunshot wound to the chest. My other brother, who has autism, had shot him point blank in the heart. My youngest brother had to call the police because our dad's parents just stood there yelling at him to get up, even kicking him. The brother I dreamed about flatlined in the ambulance. His heart completely stopped. After 2 major operations, including open heart surgery, he survived and returned to normal. Almost every day I think about that dream and how if I had gone with them, maybe I could have stopped it. It's painful seeing the scar on his chest that stretches down to his belly button, but I know someone or something was watching over him. I hope I'm never that close to being right again. Story 29. I was living with my fiancé at his parents' house. Since it was summer break, I was usually awake most of the night and slept until 1 or 2 p.m. One night, I passed his father sitting on the couch, just staring at the TV. This wasn't unusual. In the 3 years I'd been living there during college breaks, this man hadn't said more than 10 words to me. So I went off to bed, just feeling a little strange that he hadn't reacted at all when I walked by. Morning came. I woke up at 10 a.m., only 5 hours of sleep, but something felt wrong. I had a rising sense of panic, almost a full-on panic attack. I walked into the living room to find my fiancé's dad still sitting on the couch. Still staring, he hadn't moved. I asked if he was all right and called his name. No response. That's when my fiancé's mother walked out of the kitchen, shrugged and said, "He's been like that all morning." Then I noticed the smell of urine. He hadn't been able to get up and use the bathroom. I told her something was seriously wrong and that we needed to call 911 immediately. EMTs arrived within minutes and got him into the ambulance, still not getting a conscious response from him. He had never been in good health. He was battling both sarcoidosis and histoplasmosis. Well, the histoplasmosis was gone, and without the fungus to attack, the medication had started damaging his organs. His kidneys and liver weren't functioning properly, and he had a dangerously high level of ammonia in his system. It had been building up for over a month, and he wouldn't have survived another few hours if we had left him alone. Story 30. I was introduced to this girl by a friend in Philly. We started to like each other, and eventually she drove up to visit her aunt and see me in New York City. We ended up sleeping together, and I started developing strong feelings for her. She was always a little strange about hanging out with me, and I never got to go to her place. By her 3rd trip to see me, I pressed the issue, and she finally explained. She had a fiancé who constantly cheated on her. Though they had ended things, he was still around and prone to violence. She assured me they were done and that he was just crazy, but something kept bothering me. Probably the fact that she always had to visit New York under the excuse of staying with her aunt. 2 weeks later, I messaged her on Facebook. She acted strangely and asked me to come down to Philly that night. She also started a lot of explicit talk that I hadn't really heard from her before. Once again, my brain was no match for my hormones, and I decided I would go. I told my brother, and he made a joke about how if her ex-fiancé stabbed me to death for seeing his ex, he was going to make a joke at my funeral about how there must not have been any women in New York. I laughed, but I started thinking, what if that actually happens? I called her and canceled. She had no idea what I was talking about when I said I wasn't coming. Turns out her ex-fiancé still had access to her Facebook. He had sent me those messages, pretending to be her. He was planning to beat me up with a few of his friends the moment I got out of the car. I probably avoided getting seriously hurt, or worse, all because of a bad joke from my brother that gave me a really uneasy feeling. Story 31. Not my story, but my great aunt's. When she was a kid, there was a large apartment building being constructed a few blocks from her house, and all the neighborhood kids would go over after school to play around on it. One day she was playing there when she suddenly had a strong feeling that she should go home. She looked up and realized it was getting dark, and everyone else had already left. She looked around a little more and saw a man standing across the street just staring at her. He started walking toward her, and panicking, she ran up to the third top floor of the building. There was a big pile of sawdust below, and she was considering jumping. She could hear the man climbing the stairs after her, when suddenly she heard a voice very clearly say, "Don't jump, look again." She did, and she saw a long worker's ladder propped up on the side of the building. She ran to it, climbed down, and only looked up again once she hit the ground. The man was standing in the window watching her. She pushed the ladder over and ran home as fast as she could. She never saw him again and still doesn't know whose voice that was, but it probably saved her life. If she had jumped, she likely would have been seriously hurt, and that man definitely didn't just want to say hello. Story 32. I was forced to go to some church function. I was probably about 12 or 13 at the time, and I had an absolutely paralyzing feeling about going. I just couldn't put my finger on it. But of course, I just had to go. So my family and I got there, and after about an hour, some friends and I were horsing around. Here's where the story gets fuzzy for me. I was running toward a door for some reason, and as I was swiveling my head to see where to grab it, my eyes couldn't adjust fast enough to the dark sky outside through the glass. I misjudged where the push bar was. I ran right through the glass, plate glass, mind you, with both arms, and it shattered into sharp chunks. I pulled my arms back to my body, which in hindsight was the worst possible thing I could have done, and ended up slicing through several tendons and my radial artery. The only thought I had was, I knew I was right not to want to come. The deacon managed to drive me to the hospital, which was only about 2 minutes away, given how fast he was going. The ER doctor stopped the bleeding, but I still needed surgery for the tendons. After the surgery, it took another 6 to 9 months of physical rehabilitation before I could use my hand normally again. Story 33. There was an ugly storm brewing outside, whipping up the water on the canal next to our house, and making the boats moored on the jetty crash into each other. I remember my little sister and I leaning out on the railings, watching the trees thrash about in the high winds. She laughed as her hair danced around her face. Our rooms in our new house by the water were still being finished, and the roof wasn't completely done. We made do with some corrugated metal loosely nailed to the tops of the walls in my sister's room. She loved having her own space, so she didn't mind it being a little drafty. But that night, she was really scared. I was surprised. It wasn't like her to be afraid of anything like that. It took some convincing, but she persuaded me to let her share my bed until the storm died down. I'm so glad she did, after what we found the next morning. The two of us woke up to a strange light coming from under the door of her bedroom. I cautiously opened it to blinding daylight and a sudden wave of dread. It took me a moment to process what I was seeing. The roof was completely gone. Everything in the room was trashed. Her bed, the mattress and sheets, had been torn straight down the middle. As the roof flew off, it had gouged a deep furrow right through her bed. If she hadn't pleaded with me that night, or if I hadn't let her in, I could have lost my fearless little sister. Story 34. Back in the summer of 2010, I was listening to a U2 CD, and everything felt normal until this one song came on. The Hands That Built America isn't really a sad song, but for some reason, it made me feel deeply emotional, specifically about my dog, Pablo. He was a Great Dane and in perfectly good health at the time. We had to take him to the kennel because we were going on our annual trip to visit family on the East Coast. When we got back, he seemed fine. But less than 2 weeks later, he suffered a severe case of bloating, when the stomach flips over and ties itself off. The cost of surgery and the quality of life afterward led us to make the heartbreaking decision to put him down. I still have a hard time hearing that song. That same year, we got a new dog named Moose. He was much younger than Pablo and way more energetic. We had him up until a few weeks ago. Right before returning from our annual trip this year, I bought a new Porcupine Tree CD and had just started listening to it when I suddenly felt a wave of dread. I absolutely had to get home. We were leaving the next day anyway, so I figured I'd see Moose soon enough. But when we went to pick him up from the kennel, we got a call saying he hadn't been himself. Sure enough, he could barely stand. We learned that he had a rare bone anomaly on several vertebrae that was damaging his spinal cord. It was inoperable. We had to put him down. Lightbulb's Son was the trigger song that time. Now I feel like if I ever feel that kind of unnatural sadness over a song again, it means another dog we love won't make it. Story 35. I know I'm late, and this will probably get buried, but maybe writing it will help me feel better. I have severe anxiety, constant 24/7. So sometimes I get these horrible feelings in my gut. Yesterday, my significant other went to work for his usual 8-hour shift, usually getting home around 4 p.m. By 4:30, he still wasn't home, and I started to worry. At 4:22, he called me to say he had been in a car accident while taking our friend home. After the accident, we were in last 4th of July. I've been terrified of cars. He got home, and everything seemed fine. Later, we decided to go visit our friends. No big deal. But the whole way there, I had this gut-wrenching feeling. I told him about it repeatedly that night. At 10 p.m., we decided to head home. At 10:01, we started getting ready to leave. At 10:03, our friends started acting strange and wouldn't listen to anyone. At 10:04, he was pale. His lips had turned blue, his eyes rolled back into his head, and he slumped over in his chair. We had been calling his name for a few minutes by then. His girlfriend ran inside to get help, and my partner rushed over to check his pulse. It was chaotic. He sat there completely unresponsive for over 2 minutes. By 10:06, everyone was outside as he suddenly began vomiting and slowly regained color. He had no memory of what happened. I knew before we even went that something felt wrong. I'm just grateful we were there to help when it all unfolded. Story 36. A few years ago in high school, some buddies and I were headed to a party. Everyone liked to pregame, get drunk before the party, so they'd show up already wasted. We were getting a ride from an acquaintance of ours, but I had a bad feeling about it. I don't know what it was. I just had a strong sense that the kid had been drinking before coming to pick us up, and that he wasn't actually sober. You know how high schoolers are. Very hard to convince. My friends were all for getting picked up and just thought I was being paranoid. Eventually, they got so annoyed with me badgering them about it that they decided we'd just walk to the party instead. We got there and had a good time. After a little while, I realized the guy who was supposed to drive us wasn't there. Later, I found out that he got into a car accident on the way and died. It was heartbreaking to hear, but it was also a wake-up call for my friends. After that, we all started acting more responsibly. Even in the darkest times, there's a lesson to be learned. Story 37. Not mine, but my mother's. When I was about 5 years old, we lived in a town in northern Alabama. She was pregnant with my younger sister and had a doctor's appointment scheduled for 1 week. But as we were returning from a trip out of town, she suddenly decided that it wasn't a good time to go to the appointment. We would have been back in town for days by then, and nothing else conflicted with it. She just canceled because something felt off. Later that week, on the day of the appointment, my school was let out early due to a tornado outbreak in the area. What I consider to be my first memory is how the sky looked that day. It's burned into my brain. This wasn't a typical weather alert. This was a something big and terrible is happening right now type of storm. It looked like nighttime at 3 p.m. The clouds were dark and ominous. Luckily, our house and everyone in it were fine, though other parts of the city weren't so lucky. One of the buildings hit was the office where my mother's doctor worked. I don't remember if the tornado struck at the exact time her appointment was supposed to happen, but it was at most 10 minutes off either way. If she hadn't canceled, she would have been in that building. Story 38. Given that the thread is already over 2,000 comments, this might get buried, but I've been telling this story a lot lately because of the recent 6.0 earthquake that hit Napa. So here it is. I was playing Yoshi's Island on my Game Boy Advance with my younger brother while sitting on a couch inside Costco. Our parents were shopping. Suddenly, I got this strange feeling in my gut, like butterflies. So I told my brother we should go find our parents and see what they were up to. We found them, and my mom was asking which snack pack we wanted when my dad suddenly shouted, "Earthquake!" It felt like he yelled it a second or two before anything actually happened. Then the ground started to rumble. Boxes began falling from the high shelves. Luckily, we were right next to the emergency exit, and we ran out just as the earthquake ended. The epicenter was in San Simeon, near Hearst Castle. I was at a Costco in Santa Maria. 2 women were tragically killed when buildings collapsed, but aside from that, there wasn't much harm or property damage as far as I can remember. My 5th-grade mind was terrified of earthquakes for a long time after that. I'm just glad I had that gut feeling. If I hadn't, I might not have gotten to my parents in time, or known what to do once it started. Story 39. I get dreams that I can't say predict the future, because I don't even know if I believe in that. But I do know that I've had dreams that came true. I never know which ones they are until they actually happen. They're not always 100% accurate. The idea might be the same, but the people involved could be different. If a dream involves injury or death, I tell my mom, she takes it seriously because she says my great-grandmother had the same thing. Also, I don't want to feel crazy when I say, I knew this would happen, and nobody believes me. I had a kitten that I rescued. We called her Bailey. I bottle-fed her, litter-trained her. Before that, I had to stimulate her to go. She loved me like a mother, and I was unbelievably attached to her. She was so tiny. I had a dream that I rolled over in my sleep and killed her. I woke up already sobbing. She was sleeping between my boyfriend and me, snuggled in. I grabbed her and placed her in a tote. No lid, but it was tall enough that she couldn't climb out. I added a comfy pillow and told myself that no matter how cute she was, she couldn't sleep with me again until she was bigger. Just 2 or 3 days later, it still hurts to say, my mom accidentally sat on her. Bailey had curled up under a blanket on the couch. My mom had gotten up, and when she sat back down, she saw Bailey's tail sticking out from underneath. I was heartbroken. I had hoped I'd prevented something by trying to keep her safe at night. It still hurts because she was amazing, even for how tiny she was. She was my baby. She would have been an incredible cat. It's painful to think she might have died wondering why I didn't protect her. I know she was just a cat, and I might sound crazy, but we spent so much time together in those 4 short weeks. She needed me for everything. Round-the-clock feedings. I'd just gotten her to start eating solid food the week before. Story 40. I met up with a friend of mine on June 8, 1994, and he told me he had seen a bad motorcycle accident. He said the guy was dead. They had already covered his body. I had a gut feeling that it was my best friend. My friend said it didn't look like his bike, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Fast forward an hour, and it turns out it was my best friend. There was a lot of confusion, but he was alive. The first responding officer had covered him at the scene. Paramedics found a pulse and called for a helicopter. He was flown to our local hospital, which had a neurological intensive care unit, and was placed in one of the 7 beds in the ICU wing. His brain was swelling, and his right arm was broken in several places. They stabilized him and put him 6th on the priority list. For those who don't know, that list ranks patients by survival probability. If multiple patients code out, and there isn't enough staff to handle everyone, the staff prioritizes those ranked higher. From the original list that day, patients ranked 6 and 7 survived. The others didn't. And as more patients arrived, more people died. I'll never forget that waiting room. It's hard to describe the heartbreak of seeing families arrive full of hope and then leave hours later after crying every ounce of their souls in collective grief. Some patients had 1 visitor, others had dozens. Only immediate family could see the patient, but everyone else still came to show support, just like I did. My friend is mostly intact today. They never had to drill into his skull, although they came close several times. At one point, he was prepped for surgery to amputate his right arm just below the elbow because of how mangled it was. A doctor just coming off a full day of surgery looked at the x-rays and said, "I think I can save his arm." And he did. Both of his wrists now have scars several inches long, top and bottom. His right leg is still full of clots and is twice the size of his left. He lives in constant pain, but he's alive. And I'll never forget how absolutely certain I was that he was the one under that sheet that day. It took everything to convince myself otherwise. Story 41. 3 years ago, my father was nearing the end of his battle with cancer. By that point, he was unconscious. I would visit him every afternoon, sit with him, and hold his arm. Sometimes I doze off. One particular day, I had a dream while resting. In the dream, we were sitting on a bench, waiting for his ride. It was just a dream, but it felt very real. We were talking. Sitting with us was an uncle, but I couldn't tell who it was. The ride arrived, and I told my dad, "Okay, it's time for you to go. I'll see you again soon." I truly believe I was with my father when he passed. Wherever he went, it felt like an honor. I told my sister about the dream when I got home, just because it was so peaceful. 3 days later, my dad passed away, but after that, the identity of the uncle in the dream started to bother me. I couldn't figure out who it was. I have several uncles on both sides of the family. It started to feel like whoever it was might be next. I called around to check on all of them. Everyone was fine, healthy. Then 6 months later, while visiting family in Mexico, my aunt pulled me aside. She told me they had learned from a mutual friend that my father's brother, who had been estranged from the family for nearly 10 years, had passed away from cancer a month or two after my dad. He died alone, with no friends or family. I had completely forgotten about him when I was checking on the others. Last I heard, he had moved to Cuba. I was in the US. He was a cool guy who had gotten involved in some bad things. My father tried to help him, but in the end, he cut ties with the family. I have good memories of him. When I found out, I broke down. I was really upset. I believe the only family he had at the end was us. In a dream, if you believe in those things. I didn't before, but now I absolutely do. Maybe it was just my brain creating a way to process grief, but his presence in that dream felt real, tangibly real. Story 42. A couple of summers ago, I was at our local ski resort with a friend. We were hiking around and taking pictures, having a great time. But on the walk back to my car, I suddenly went quiet. I had a bad feeling I couldn't explain. My friend was confused. I was laughing and happy one moment, then suddenly quiet and moody the whole way home. When I got back, I found my parents watching the news crying. Our family used to have an annual reunion, sort of a local community get-together. A lot of people in our family and area are private pilots, so it became known as the last name fly-in. My grandpa had asked me to come with him, but I already had plans. It turns out he was there to witness a horrific plane crash. 2 close family friends were killed in a fiery wreck. The reunion has been discontinued since, and it hit our community really hard. What really shook me is that the crash happened around the exact time I went silent. It's strange to see your dad cry. He couldn't even look at the TV. And all I could think was how I felt it before I even knew. Story 43. In January of this year, during one of the worst blizzards in my area of New York State, I had just visited my significant other on her break at work. I told her to take a certain way home, the highway near our house, because that road is always cleared quickly due to the volume of traffic. She gets off work at 8 p.m. and tells me she's heading home. I said, "I love you. Please let me know when you get there. Drive safe." It usually takes her 20 minutes to get home, but when half an hour went by, I started feeling really nervous. I had a bad feeling in my gut and my head. Then suddenly she called me, something she never does right after getting home, because she likes to relax, eat dinner, shower, and unwind. I answered the phone and heard her crying hysterically. I instinctively threw on my shoes and coat and ran to my car before I even knew what had happened. She had been in a head-on collision. One car hit her from the front and another from the back. It was possibly the most terrifying moment of our lives. She had purchased a really expensive car, a BMW, that none of us thought she needed, especially since she could barely afford it. But if it hadn't been for that car, she wouldn't have survived. When she crashed, the car's OnStar system activated automatically and called the police. Thankfully, our local police station and firehouse were less than a quarter mile from her house. This year has been one of the hardest years of our lives. She made it out, but now she suffers from severe back, neck, and spine issues. It's affected our relationship, but she's alive, and that's what matters. I don't know what it is about life that puts you in positions where you have to truly see what you're capable of handling, but dealing with the aftermath of that accident has brought us closer than ever. Just last night, she woke me up in the middle of the night. I was annoyed, like, "Why would you wake me up?" But she had heard a car crash just outside our apartment complex. If you don't think car accidents are serious, you're not paying attention. I tell people all the time, be aware of your surroundings when driving. Don't trust other drivers, not even for a second. In the blink of an eye, someone's entire life can change forever.